He walked into the diner drenched from the storm, still catching his breath when the manager's voice cut through the room like a blade, firing him on the spot in front of everyone. No one stepped in. No one defended him. Yet he had no idea that the stranger he rescued in last night's brutal rainstorm was sitting quietly in the corner, watching everything. And within hours, every cruel word thrown at him would come back to haunt the man who tried to break him. What happened between that stormy night and this moment inside the diner? Comment and tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Before everything unraveled inside Riverbend Diner, Jaden Brooks was simply trying to make it through another long day. As a single father raising his 6-year-old daughter, Maya, life demanded more from him than it ever returned. His mornings started before sunrise, his nights stretched far past exhaustion, and every hour in between was spent trying to keep their small world steady. Working at Riverbend Diner wasn't glamorous, but it paid the rent, kept food on the table, and allowed Jaden to be home in time to help Maya with her drawings. The one part of his day that made everything worth it. His coworkers, Lisa Martinez and Tommy Rivers, respected him. Customers appreciated his kindness. Even on the hardest days, he showed up with quiet determination, never asking for sympathy, only hoping life wouldn't throw anything heavier than he could carry. But lately, the weight had been increasing. Bills piled faster than paychecks. His old pickup rattled more loudly each morning. And despite 4 years of commitment, Derek Matthews, the diner's sharp-tongued manager, seemed to find new ways to remind Jaden of his place, subtle dismissals, clipped comments, and glares that lingered longer than necessary. Still, Jaden endured. For Maya, he would always endure. On the night everything began to shift, the rain hadn't simply fallen. It attacked the streets in sheets of silver, reducing visibility to nearly nothing. The diner had closed late, and all Jaden wanted was to get home to Maya and pray the week's paycheck would stretch a little further. But as he drove through the storm, something on the roadside caught his eye. A stalled black sedan, hood open, steam rising into the rain. An older man, soaked, shivering, stranded. Jaden didn't know it then, but stopping his truck in that moment would set off a chain of events that would test his strength, expose injustice, and pull him into a storm far larger than the one outside his window. The storm only worsened as Jaden Brooks pulled his old pickup to the side of the deserted road. Lightning flashed against the soaked pavement, revealing the shivering figure leaning over the stalled sedan. The older man, later introduced as Robert Chamberlain, was drenched, trembling, and clearly out of options. While instinct urged Jaden to get home to Maya, something deeper pushed him to act. He had known helpless moments too well to ignore someone else's. When Robert climbed inside the warm truck, Jaden noticed how the man's hands shook, how his soaked suit clung to him, and how relief flooded his face after nearly an hour in the cold. The ride back was quiet but heavy with unspoken gratitude. Jaden offered his home for the night, a small apartment, modest and worn but clean, safe, and filled with the warmth only a devoted parent could create. Robert observed every detail. Maya's toys tucked neatly in a corner, children's drawings taped to the fridge, the pictures of Jaden's late wife. He saw a man who carried more responsibility than most, yet still found room for kindness. Jaden didn't know it, but this simple act, opening his door to a stranger, was the beginning of everything that would come next. By morning, Robert was gone, leaving behind only a handwritten note. Jaden smiled at the gratitude in the message, unaware of the powerful identity behind the name signed at the bottom. The day, however, had no intention of being kind. On the way to Riverbend Diner, Jaden's truck sputtered and coughed before stalling completely. Rain began again, light but persistent, soaking his shirt as he tried restarting the engine. By the time it finally roared back to life, he was already late, something Derek Matthews never tolerated. When Jaden rushed through the diner doors, conversations halted. The sizzling on the grill faded as Tommy Rivers froze mid-turn, and Lisa Martinez stared with worry tightening her expression. Derek's voice cut through the silence, sharp and performative as though he enjoyed the audience. Late, unacceptable, irresponsible. He humiliated Jaden in front of everyone, dismissing every explanation before it left Jaden's lips. 4 years of perfect attendance, long hours, extra shifts, none of it mattered. Derek looked at him the way he often did, not as a hardworking father, but as someone he believed was disposable. With customers watching, Derek fired him on the spot. Jaden felt the weight of the moment crush him. The room blurred. His mind raced, not about pride but survival. Rent, groceries, Maya's school shoes, everything depended on the job. Derek ended with one cold sentence. Jaden walked out under the gray sky, unsure how he would break the news to his daughter. What he didn't know was that across the street, inside a parked black sedan, someone had seen everything. Robert Chamberlain. But this time, Robert wasn't stranded, soaked, or helpless. He sat upright, jaw tight, fists clenched around the steering wheel. His expression was no longer that of the vulnerable man Jaden had driven home. It was the expression of a man with power, influence, and a clear understanding of what he had just witnessed. And when he stepped out of that sedan and walked toward Riverbend Diner's front door, the shift in the air was unmistakable. Something was about to happen. Something no one inside the diner was prepared for. And Derek Matthews was about to learn how quickly the tables could turn. When Jaden Brooks walked back into Riverbend Diner at Derek's unexpected request, he carried confusion, dread, and a flicker of hope he tried not to trust. The diner's usual morning noise had quieted into a tense hum. Eyes followed him, some apologetic, some uncertain, while Derek stood stiffly near the counter, his forced smile cracking at the edges. But Jaden's attention shifted the moment he saw him. Robert Chamberlain. No longer the drenched, fragile man from the storm. No longer the stranded stranger grateful for a warm meal and shelter. Now he stood in a tailored suit, shoulders squared, presence unshakable. The entire room seemed to lean toward him, as if recognizing authority before it was spoken. Jaden felt his heart pound. Why was Robert here? What had he walked into? Robert turned slowly, his eyes meeting Jaden's with a warmth that stood in stark contrast to the cold expression he leveled at Derek moments later. Then his voice rose, steady and commanding, cutting through the diner like a blade. He revealed who he truly was, the owner of Riverbend Diner. A ripple of shock spread across the room. Lisa nearly dropped her notepad. Tommy froze mid-step. Derek's face drained of color as each word sank deeper, exposing the truth he could no longer control. But the real impact came when Robert described exactly what he had witnessed. The public humiliation, the cruel dismissal, the disregard for loyalty, kindness, and humanity. Derek stammered, reaching for excuses that sounded weaker with each breath. His words tripped over themselves, collapsing under the weight of Robert's stare. The staff watched silently, the air pulsing with the tension of a long-awaited reckoning. Then came the moment that shifted everything. Robert announced that Jaden wasn't just rehired, he was being promoted to co-manager of the diner. A gasp broke from somewhere in the back. Lisa's hands flew to her mouth. Tommy nodded with fierce approval. But Derek stood trembling, disbelief twisting into rage. His voice cracked as he tried to deny, to rewrite the morning, to cling to a sense of authority he no longer had. And then Robert's tone changed. Serious, controlled, unmistakably final. He presented evidence, clear, undeniable proof of Derek's months of theft, altered records, and hidden transactions. The videos, the timestamps, the bills marked and tracked. Jaden watched Derek's face collapse into panic, watched the reality of consequences settle over him like a crushing weight. Moments later, the door chimed again. 2 police officers stepped inside. The cuffs clicked around Derek's wrists, each metallic snap echoing through the diner like punctuation to a long-silenced truth. Customers stared, staff held their breath, and Jaden stood motionless, caught between disbelief and relief, as the man who tried to destroy him was led out in shame. But the moment wasn't just about Derek's fall. It was about the rise that followed. The diner, the staff, the customers, all turned toward Jaden, not with pity, not with hesitation, but with recognition. He had survived the storm. He had stood with integrity, and now the world was finally seeing it. The question now was simple. What would Jaden do with the chance he never expected to receive? In the weeks that followed, Jaden Brooks settled into a role he never imagined he would hold. Riverbend Diner transformed, not because of its new policies or fresh paint, but because the atmosphere inside finally reflected dignity. Staff felt safer, customers noticed the difference. And for the first time in years, Jaden walked into work without the weight of fear pressing against his chest. With Robert Chamberlain's support, Jaden created a space built on fairness, compassion, and respect, values he once believed the world had forgotten. And at home, Maya began to see her father not just as the man who kept their little family going, but as someone who had overcome something quietly brutal, something most people never understood unless they lived it. But beneath the relief, Jaden couldn't shake the truth revealed in those painful moments inside the diner. He had been fired not because of lateness, not because of performance, but because a man in power saw him as someone easy to blame, easy to discard, easy to strip of worth. It wasn't new, it wasn't rare. It was the quiet kind of racism, subtle enough to deny but sharp enough to wound, that shaped the lives of countless black men and women across America. Yet Jaden's story didn't end in despair. It ended in reclamation, in standing tall, in proving that dignity does not depend on someone else's approval. And still, his journey raised a question that reached far beyond the walls of Riverbend Diner. Why do black individuals still have to fight twice as hard to be treated as fully human? It's a question that lingers, a question that should never have to be asked, yet echoes in workplaces, schools, neighborhoods, and homes across the country. Jaden's experience is one story, but it speaks to millions. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to Black Community Struggles for more powerful stories about justice, truth, and our community's fight to be seen. And don't forget to hit that like button. Your support helps these stories reach the people who need them most.